Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. Gavan Casey here, and I'm joined as always by my esteemed colleague who you might have seen on RT screens over the weekend, Murray Kinsella of the 42.ie. Murray, how are you?
I'm good, thanks Gav. I'm a bit scatterbrained at the moment. We're having some work done in the house, so it took us a while to get set up for this podcast. I'm on the bed now and there's plasterboard behind me, so excuse the view if you're watching on YouTube.
He is fully clothed, I should stress, if you're only listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Joining us, as always, is Bernard Jackman, and Birch will look ahead to some of the URC action coming up this weekend, look back in the provinces from last weekend as well, chat about the Irish women, a couple of coaching situations, loads to talk about, but we do want to start with your very flamboyant and extravagant looking trip to Paris. If people were following you on Instagram over the weekend or Twitter, I think they would have had a lot of envy. So how did you get on? And tell us about the trip generally. Why were you going there?
Yeah, I escaped my library for 2 days. I'm running on pain au chocolat and croissants at the moment, having absolutely smashed them in Paris. Now, look at my son, when he was in school, in school in France, and this is a bit of a generalisation, but in Grenoble anyway, the kids in his class were either Olympique Marseille, Olympique Lyon or PSG fans, and one of his best buddies was PSG. So when he was 5 and 6, he liked PSG. So we've always kind of kept an eye on them since we left, and while we were over there. And then obviously when Messi signed this summer, it was his 13th birthday. He'd broken his leg. I was like, look, let's do something a bit cool. So I booked the Champions League. I saw they got Man City in the Champions League, so I said, let's go to Paris for the Champions League game. And yes, we flew Tuesday morning. Messi had been injured the last 3 matches, so when we got off the plane, I follow PSG on Twitter, and I got a notification saying he was fit. So that was the first bit of good news. And then I got tickets for the game a couple of weeks ago. Pretty ridiculously hard to get, but got them. And then went to the club shop Tuesday morning. Got a nice kit for him. And then the game was just phenomenal. I mean, Parc des Princes, obviously Irish rugby fans who are a little bit older will have been there on dark days for Irish rugby, but it's in an unbelievably nice area of France. Stade Francais, Stade Jean de Boulogne is recited. Roland Garros is around the corner. I mean, it's phenomenal. And then it's a kind of old school stadium that's been modernised just enough to have the creature comforts that you like, but also has that raw, kind of cathedral passion. And it was a great game. And Man City could have won 5-1. PSG ended up winning 2-0, and we were there for Messi's first goal. But the atmosphere, and for me, like as I said, I've been looking, like when I go to games now, I'm usually in a press box, but like surrounded by fans. And because Messi hadn't done a huge amount for 80 minutes, the fellas behind us were basically saying, il est nul, Messi, whatever. It basically means he's crap, right? And myself and Ben were laughing. Next thing he scores the goal, and they were singing songs, Messi's the greatest. And it was just, one action can just change people's perception. And the place went absolutely nuts. I mean, like the PSG Ultras, they were in there. We went early into the game. We were in there about an hour and a bit beforehand, and they were just in there probably maybe 2 hours the gates open, but just going absolutely crazy for the whole 3 hours or whatever, an hour beforehand in the match. It was phenomenal atmosphere. I forgot how good games in France are, to be honest. And I know rugby's not as good as soccer, but the rugby games there, in fairness, can be nuts as well. And it was brilliant. It was absolutely amazing.
When you're up there in the stands looking down at a game, even in a different sport, is it difficult to switch off the analyst hat? Like, are you looking at players' movement and things like that and sort of translating it back to rugby?
Yeah, well, I was looking, to be honest, so obviously with with PSG, with Messi, Neymar and Mbappe, they actually don't have a midfield. It's they basically have defenders and attackers, and in fairness to Neymar and Mbappe, they work back. Messi didn't do too much tracking back, to be honest, but obviously he's come back from injury. Tactically, I think it was really interesting, and obviously how Pochettino's going to keep those 3 lads in the team, and obviously then have to spend so much time defending because you don't really have a midfield. It was class. But Messi, Neymar, Mbappe are the big names. But there's a guy, Marco Verratti. I've never seen anybody as good. He was absolutely unreal. And for me, if you didn't know, what the others have done, and obviously he was the guy on the night that stood out for me as just being a complete class act and a level above even Kevin De Bruyne and, some absolute world-class players on a night.
Wasn't Guardiola saying he's in love with Verratti, his kind of player, I'd imagine. It sounds like an unreal experience. What a goal to be there for as well, Birch. But I'm, being a rugby nerd, more interested in your next part of your trip over to Racing. How did that go?
Yeah, look at Mike, obviously. Mike Prendergast is a good friend of mine. We worked together in Grenoble and, we speak a lot. And, he told me a lot about their facility. I'd seen some of it on social media and things, but I just wanted to get out there and see what they were doing, see what it was like, and just try and stay up to date with kind of the trends in the game, and they've got Claremont on Sunday, and they had a big long unit session. Their scrum has been creaking quite a bit, and they're trying to fix that, some injuries, the usual stuff. But the big thing is obviously it's a phenomenal facility, great restaurant, great gym, great analysts, all that stuff. But it's just how open and friendly they were. And in fairness, I'd heard this from players that Lorenzetti, despite being an absolute multimillionaire and putting a lot of money in and being ruthless at the right times, the big difference between Racing 92 and a lot of clubs in France is they've really tried to focus on being a club and looking after players properly and not trying to move guys on in a poor way if they're out of form, be honouring contracts and trying to look after player welfare and things like that. Now, they haven't had the success probably that that they should have in terms of spend and doing the right things, but they've been very, very close, and I talked to the coaching staff. I mean, Toto, Laurent Travers, I would have only known him from being in a coaching dugout, and he's very animated on the sideline, quite a scary guy, and to get the first chance to chat to him, absolutely unbelievably amicable and friendly and good natured, and they all were. It was just great to catch up with Mike. Mike's obviously done incredibly well, and a hard working coach who I'd like to hope we'll see in Irish rugby at some stage. But it was just great for my son as well to see these players up close, Kirkley Beale and Vakatawa and stuff like that. And it was a great day, 24 hours, but well used.
That's class. I'm just imagining somebody fast forwarding too far through the intro of this podcast and hearing us say Marco Verratti is better than Kevin De Bruyne and thinking they're having some sort of neurological event. I'm not an expert,
but on that 90 minutes, for me, he was a brilliant.
No, I mean purely because we were speaking about soccer. Loads of rugby to talk about as well. I'm glad you had that. Really enjoyed that trip, Birch. It looked class, even via social media. We'll start with the Ireland women's team, lads, and it's a bit of a familiar team, unfortunately, except this was really rock bottom. And I think the scenes at the end of the game with this sort of anguish and the level of upset across the players were just objectively sad. Like there's no other way of putting it, I don't think. We need to avoid having the same conversation as we've had the last couple of weeks, you know what I mean? Because we have spoken about the bigger picture and things like that. But Murray, if I could put all the pressure and I don't know, where do we go from here, basically, is the question I'm trying to ask you.
The review process has started, and that needs to be really honest, and I think a bit more transparent and open than has been the case in the past. IRFU reviews, we obviously don't generally get to see any of it. You get a kind of synopsis, usually through David Nucifora these days. But I think everyone would benefit from really understanding how the IRFU view this one, whether they're self-critical, whether they place the blame on coaching staff and players, or how they see it. And listen, there's probably both aspects to it. The players and the coaches didn't do their job to the maximum of their potential. I think we can all see that. The team has more talent than they showed in this qualifier. Their line-out wasn't good enough. They had handling errors at key moments. The teams were really consistent through the games. Breakdown issues, sloppy discipline. But the fact that they were trends and the fact that the players didn't handle that pressure and the coach didn't handle that pressure better makes you think back to some of the stuff we have discussed around the pathway and the system and producing players. And for me, it needs to be more than just focusing on the 3 games, which is generally what these reviews do. You've got to look a bit deeper to think, how can Irish rugby produce players who are better capable and better prepared for big high pressure 15s matches, because that's what this is. There's that issue around 7s and 15s as well, and everyone's been discussing a couple of those players kind of getting parachuted in late stage, not much experience. And again, it was something we flagged. Like, I'm kind of glad we did that podcast when we did it, because we're not just looking back with hindsight now, which is the easiest thing to do. And listen, that is an unfair position we have on it all now. There were mistakes made in probably in selection and within the game plans, within the individual performances. But for me, it definitely is the bigger picture that we've discussed. There's loads of stuff that's being done really well in women's rugby, and I think it's really important that we don't just shit on everything that's happening in women's rugby and the people who are giving up their time, the volunteers, people in paid positions as well who are doing good work. But it can definitely be channeled in a better direction, because, as you say, this is rock bottom. It's a real low, and I mean, it can't really happen again for Irish women's rugby. Rugby is such a small sport. There are so few competitive nations that it's really, really damning to miss out on a World Cup in this manner.
Birch, if this review isn't published, is it worth a shite?
No, definitely not. I think the review has become a clutch for the IRFU to, I suppose, absolve themselves of any responsibility and kick the touch. And we'll hear about something like, it's their answer to everything is, we'll wait till the review comes out. And let's just compare it to the men's World Cup, which, okay, we were there, but we certainly didn't perform at the level that was expected, hoped, promised, and that's on the back of a lot of heartache at World Cups. And I just think it wasn't really clear. I mean, we get some sound bites. Sports psychologist wasn't good enough, players aren't skillful enough, and we didn't evolve our game plan fast enough, and that's it. So like, what have we done? Okay, there's a different sports psychologist involved. If the players aren't skillful enough, what has actually been implemented on a countrywide scale or an international level to change that? And what's happened with our young players, etc., etc. And then game plan. Is our game plan cutting edge at the moment? I'm not saying it's bad, but I wouldn't say we're at the forefront of setting where the game is going, and that's just my opinion. I don't think we're behind it either. We're just in the middle. But I mean that we don't know what was written, who said what. Which I don't mind who said what, but what actually was the report? Because I could read a report and take certain things from it, and Murray, you could read a report and take other things from it, and you, Gav, as well. But we're led. David Nucifora gives us those little bits of what happened. And I mean, if he is this performance guru and rugby guru, why didn't he spot these things during the cycle? It wasn't if Ireland went in to the World Cup smashing everybody. That was a year beforehand. So there was obvious worrying signs. And if like, players don't become more unskillful when they land in Japan. Your skill set is your skill set, and you can have a bad day, but over the course of the year, or 2 years, or 3 years, that's your skill set. So if we weren't skillful enough going into that World Cup, why didn't he spot it, or other people in the organisation who are gurus spot this? So, like, that's the thing. I mean, and everyone just swallowed it. Oh, great review. Let's move on. And that's what I'm worried about. This World Cup review this qualification review, the last World Cup review in 2017. I know the people very close to it weren't happy that it wasn't shared and wasn't communicated, and maybe this time they'll have to, because it's just so bad. I mean, for us not to qualify for the World Cup is the low point of the low. But I don't see it being. It sounds great and it appeases people, but historically, I just think it's been window dressing, to be honest.
One thing I'd love to see, Gav, in terms of looking at possible solutions, and there's so many aspects to it. Obviously, it's not just a quick fix. There's not going to be one switch flicked. I would love to see the potential of the domestic game, obviously the AIL being the pinnacle of that, really harnessed, and the attitude towards it being really positive. Because in my opinion, and from people I speak to, there's almost a bit of a dismissiveness of the league from the high performance unit above it, with the RFU and the Ireland national team, and saying, oh, it's not a good enough testing ground for our players. Make it that. Like, don't just sit there and think, oh, it's not good enough to produce the best players. We need them in camp all the time. That's the only place they're going to learn. give it a chance and give it the resource and give it the love that it needs to really grow. There's unbelievably passionate people there. There's coaches who want to be upskilled even more and coach their players even better. And I think you can make it a breeding ground, because that's the way the Premier 15s and the French League are going. They're becoming even more competitive year on year. You've seen the Irish players go over there because, in their very own words, they want to be better players. They want to test themselves to a higher degree. Why can't we have that here? Why can't we have the IRFU at least facilitating or encouraging clubs to get out there and play English and French clubs at times and really test themselves that way, as well as lifting the standard of it to a point where they can view it as being worthy of producing international players. I'd love to see a refreshed attitude around that. And again, it might take a while. It's brilliant to see Ballincollig last weekend winning their first game on their debut. That is brilliant for the league. And there's a real excitement about them becoming competitive over the next few years and it not just being a top four hammering everyone else, because I suppose that's what it has been really for a kind of long time now. So that's one aspect of it. There are many others. And you're seeing like numbers pre-COVID, we're talking numbers in, as we mentioned, those kind of campaigns like Give It a Try and sevens programs even in school are getting people playing the game. But there's layers beyond that need work, like no under 20s. Obviously the step from under 18s to rugby into senior rugby is massive, and that's a big issue. And Rugby Academy Ireland took it upon themselves, an independent organisation, to create a 20s team. That was last year, wasn't it? And the IRFU basically said, good luck to you, we're not going to stand in your way. But could they be part of that, and could they encourage it a little bit more? Obviously money is part of it, but I don't think it takes a huge spend. Maybe just a freshening of the attitude and obviously adding a little bit of resource there as well. But it's, for me, kind of underneath the national team there.
You'd get the sense as well, Birch, that even say the top four clubs in the women's AIL, or those teams that are traditionally in contention for that, like even you just see some of the clubs kind of liking certain tweets and things. There seems to be a consensus formed now on the ground or at grassroots level, domestic level, that like this does need to change. It kind of feels weird that everybody seems to be pulling in the same direction, apart from the people who can actually steer things in that direction, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that the people who are pretty much running it are kind of in a bubble, an internal bubble, and obviously it's difficult for them because the results have been poor. But I don't see it all being connected, and I do think it has reached the bottom point. And I just wonder where's it going to come? I mean, we have focused massively on the sevens game in women's. There's been a huge amount of money put into that. We obviously haven't seen the transferability that we were promised, and that these players were going to be able to play on the World Series, for 9 months of the year and then play in the Six Nations. We haven't seen enough of those come true, and it probably, it's probably disenfranchised or unmotivated the 15s players who are playing in the club, where they just kind of see this preferential treatment. So that's been a big issue, and understanding how you have to basically have everybody feeling good about their own respective games. So, I'm not saying the sevens is a bad thing. It's just, unfortunately, in the eyes of most of the 15s players, and we've seen this, when top players have been pulled for sevens during Six Nations, which, let's be honest, I mean, Wales aren't in a great shape at the moment at 15s, but they didn't have to qualify for this World Cup because of previous results. So we've gradually let it decline. But just going back to my thing about a review, I mean, England did a review after a very poor Six Nations. Let's not forget, Eddie Jones got them to a World Cup final, and their success in the Six Nations leading up to that. If we had got to the World Cup final, Joe Schmidt would have a freedom of the city. You know what I mean? But they don't. High performance isn't about looking back at what teams did in the past. It's actually, where are we now? And they published that review, and Eddie Jones has now key accountables that he needs to fulfill. He had to change his staff because of feedback from players, etc. But it was very open and transparent. And Eddie Jones, one of the best coaches in the world, didn't throw his toys out of pram and said, "Oh, I don't want to have this level of scrutiny." He understands that that's high performance. Even Stuart Lancaster and Leinster, I know they win most weeks, but they review their performance in the same manner that they do whether they win or lose, and they're hard on each other, hard on themselves. And at 12 o'clock on a Monday, they have this term called sumo, shut up, move on. So like that's what high performance is about. It's about actually finding out the nitty gritty of what's working, what's not working, not being afraid to actually say, yeah, we messed up there, agreeing what the next plan is, and then actually implementing that, and understanding that regularly you're going to have to look back and go, did that work? Yes, great. Did it not work? Why? Can we fix it? And I just think that these things happen. The reviews now in the women's game is whatever. It's 2017, the last one. So it's 4 years. The men's ones generally happen after the World Cups. It's not really good enough just to tread water in supposedly high performance sport, and have the reviews when it's basically too late to perform in the key ones that we're targeting. Which for us, we want to be part of the Women's World Cup. We want to be competing and doing well at the Men's World Cup. And yes, we just seem to review every 4 years, and normally it's on the back of a negative situation when it should be actually regular anyway.
Mm.
Just to briefly jump back to the sevens thing as well, Gav. Unfortunately, how it's panned out, the IRFU are missing their targets in sevens and in 15s on the women's side now. They didn't get to the Olympics. They had heartbreak, the women's team. I mean, the effort, and you can't question that. As well as on the World Series, they're not consistently top six, which is the stated goal as well there. So you're kind of almost spreading yourself a bit thin, and you're not actually achieving either of those goals you've set out for yourself. And I'm a big fan of sevens. I love watching it. I really engage with it, but I don't think that's the case with most rugby fans, even really in Ireland, and certainly not the wider public. It hasn't been so far, it hasn't been the big attention grabber that Nusa and Anthony Eddy, who's the director of women's and sevens rugby, that's his remit, that they envisaged. And as we've mentioned, maybe it's not the smooth transition that they envisaged either. So that's definitely something that needs to be part of the review. I'm not saying rip it all up and start again, but you definitely have to consider how that's working, or as the results would suggest, not quite working at the moment. That's another part of it, definitely.
Well, to connect sorry, Birch.
Yeah, there's just something I'd like to mention as well. There's been a lot of talk and criticism of the IRFU committee and the gender imbalance, and I understand that it's very one-sided towards male, but I don't think that necessarily should be a reason why the women's game isn't performing. I mean, you can be male and female and actually male or female and care about it, and support it and put a plan in. So I think that obviously they want to get that gender higher, but I don't think that's the reason. I think we have to find out what the committee are being told is happening in women's game, and are they the ones blocking it, or have they given the performance people, the hired staff, which again we were told this is the way to go, is that hire the professional people who know rugby and let them get on with it. Have they basically said this will work for us, and it hasn't worked? I haven't seen anything. I noticed the AIL committee have found it hard to get a meeting with the IRFU committee, and that's not great. But for me, it's not male or female on a committee. It's actually what support is there, what motivation is there to deliver a vibrant game, and why isn't it happening? And it's not so people lose their jobs or anything like that. It's literally just working out what's happened, who's at fault, accept it, make a better plan, and move on.
To connect the dots of this conversation and just look at what happened on the pitch, and I know Murray, yourself and Owen Toolan did so for members on Monday, so we don't necessarily need to get into the nitty gritty of that Scotland defeat necessarily, but there's been, I guess, a consensus formed, or just the general suggestion is that Ireland vastly, grossly underperformed compared to the actual talent that they have, and that they should be probably swatting away Scotland. They should be beating Italy, who they did beat, and they should be beating Spain. That this squad is probably the best squad in that round robin, for want of a better term. Are we potentially, without meaning to be too harsh, overestimating the quality of some of these players? Because ultimately, the results are the results. And the reason I ask that is because if they are indeed better than say the three teams that they played against on paper, then how did that actually happen? I'm trying to pinpoint what is the actual issue. I'm sure there are lots of things, but could you point towards the coaching and just say, listen, it wasn't up to scratch? Because it's easy to say, the players didn't do their jobs. They've been training for months together. This isn't some ragtag bunch of people from around the country brought together to play games with no notice. Like, this is a proper team that have been putting in the work. So it just doesn't add up to me, is what I'm saying in a very long-winded way.
I think we're all guilty, all of us, of underestimating also the opposition in terms of them being at the same level as Ireland. Spain have been progressing, and for me, deserve a spot at the top table, Six Nations becoming Seven Nations or wherever that might be. And Scotland have obviously been working away as well under the limelight for us. This is the reality of where Ireland are, and that's been the eye-opening thing about it. Like, Irish rugby is not better than Spanish rugby and Scottish rugby right now. It's kind of hard to say whether Irish rugby has declined drastically or just stood completely still while everyone else has progressed. And I'm kind of leaning towards the latter part of that. Other unions are putting more resource into it. There's more interest than ever. The game is growing at an almighty rate, quicker than men's rugby. And Irish rugby just hasn't been able to harness that. Obviously, the Home World Cup in 2017 was a disastrous element of that. That was supposed to be the kind of capturing of the imagination and getting a massive flood of kind of home support. Instead, it was just like left a sour taste, didn't it? It was just acrimonious and kind of just behind the scenes, things weren't right, and there was no rebound from that. So, Irish rugby hasn't been able to step forward, and yeah, it's been eye-opening in that regard. I think we had maybe. Well, I certainly thought Ireland were favourites going into that competition, but now I think, what did I base that on? I probably didn't do enough homework, and maybe that was a similar trap. And then the shock of the Spanish game was really evident, wasn't it? You could see it on the players' faces at the end of that, and it was hugely damaging for confidence. And all the issues that happened in that game never went away. And absolutely, again, coaching is part of that. With your line out, you would hope that two games after a disaster like that in the Spanish one, you'd have fixed or simplified it, but it continued to cause them massive issues. I think it was probably the biggest overall issue for me. They continually lost lineouts in the 22 when they had chances to pressure and put on scores, and poor tactical decisions, even at what Ireland were 5 points ahead when they took that quick tap penalty in the second half and didn't convert. And you think, slot over 3 points there, give yourself a bit of breathing room strategically, and Scotland are probably beaten at that stage, but you gave them and away they go. So yeah, there are absolutely loads. We could get into so much detail and nitty gritty, but I don't think the team, while maybe we underestimated the opposition, I don't think they went close to their potential really, and that's a familiar trend in tournament rugby with Irish teams.
So, Birch, it is a familiar trend, unfortunately, and the mind almost wanders back to 2007 and the Men's World Cup in a way, where a team is perceived to have underperformed to a huge degree. Do you think Ireland simply underperformed across the board? And why did that happen? I know that's a very difficult question to answer, but again, given the work they had put in, given the preparation they had done, or so we're told, on a strategic sort of level, on a coaching level, how does that actually happen across 3 games? Because, Murray, I think you're being a bit harsh in saying you didn't do your homework in seeing Ireland as being favourites for that tournament, because they do routinely beat Scotland and Italy. While they have improved, Ireland have beaten them very recently. So, okay, Spain were kind of the wild cards. We knew they were decent, but if you're beating Scotland and Italy, you should be beating Spain as well, is the reality of it. And they failed to beat 2 of these teams, Birch.
Yeah, I think there was a drop-off in what we'd seen in the Six Nations. So I felt we were comfortable, obviously, against Wales, Scotland, and we beat Italy, even though Italy had a lot of chances. We beat them quite comfortably on the score, or in the end. And then, obviously, I think the biggest issue was we were match shy, so we didn't get games under our belt. There was a false sense of where we were at. So, in the high performance centre at training, our second 15 obviously aren't as good as our first 15. So potentially, there wasn't that level of competition at training. We possibly underestimated Spain, looking back at the selection, and some new caps, etc., which World Cup qualifiers probably not the ideal time to blood them. Probably left some better players at home, and suddenly you lose to Spain, and it just absolutely rocks. I spoke about the difference between self-belief and confidence. I felt that that Spain defeat, as things played out, it rocked the women's self-belief, and I thought, looking at them pre-match, they were very nervous, and I just don't think they could get enough in the tournament. Even beating Italy, didn't calm them down enough to be able to play without that performance anxiety. That I think that performance anxiety played a part as well in that, you know, they made errors that are uncharacteristic that they wouldn't make normally when we're in a good mind space and match fit, etc. So I just think it was, you know, a domino effect, and it came from that Spanish defeat, where, you know, we were match fitness shy and a few selection errors, and we just couldn't recover really.
Last thing before we move on, Gav, I just wanted to say, you know, it's such a sad way for Claire Malloy to go out at the end of her Ireland career. An unbelievably great Irish rugby player, who had an unbelievably strong skill set, breakdown specialist, skillful on the ball, obviously massive work rate throughout her career. Probably would have wanted to be starting those games and have had more of an influence. You saw when she came off the bench, 2 jackal turnovers at the breakdown, 1 clean, 1 was a penalty, and she had a strip in the tackle as well, and made an impact on the game. A wonderful career, and it's obviously not a fitting way for her to go out, but you have to hope that there's going to be more players like that coming down the pipeline, and that they will have, I suppose, some of the highs that she had with Irish rugby, because there were brilliant moments there. It's a long time ago now at this stage, unfortunately, but the only way from where they are right now is up. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, 74 caps, 3 World Cups, 2 Six Nations titles, 1 talented woman. We wish her well as she steps away. Let's chat URC then, lads. Let's start with Connacht. Were you in Cardiff, Birch?
Yeah, I was in Cardiff for Connacht. Cardiff, I think Cardiff are going to be really good this year. I think that they've got a nice squad. I think obviously bringing back Reece Priestland, even though he got injured, gives him a second 10, a great goal kicker. Apparently he's been unbelievably influential in pre-season. Di Young is there now, so they've got some real strong leadership from the top. You know, he's been brutally honest with them in terms of their consistency, their fitness level. So they've worked really hard. They brought Matthew Screech in, a lock from the Dragons, who's experienced, big ball carrier, and runs a good line out. They probably lack that. They've obviously lost Corey Hill, but I think they've got a squad. I mean, you know, big, like when the 2 teams lined up for the minute silence, it was like a schoolboy team against an adult team in terms of size. Now you'd expect that when Connacht play the Bulls or Leinster or the Sharks, but you know, when up against a Welsh region who they've kind of beaten quite regularly over the last 4 or 5 years, and would fancy their chances of being on a level playing field. Yeah, I left the ground worried about Connacht, to be honest. And it wasn't that Connacht didn't work hard or didn't have opportunities; they did. But I just feel it's going to be an incredibly tough season for them, given how, you know, they haven't. Yeah, just how susceptible they're going to be to injuries in terms of depth, in terms of their budget, in terms of the fact that the qualification for the Champions Cup now is much more difficult, and will get even more difficult next year when the South African teams can qualify. So yeah, I think I really feel for Andy Friend, because a lot of people judge Connacht on the same level as they judge Leinster, Munster, Ulster, but you have to understand that there's been a deficit in terms of funding there for 20 years, and over time that adds up. And you can have a development province without calling them a development province if you just starve them of funding. And I think, you know, while they get enough to survive and be battlers, and last year they were brilliant. They beat Ulster, Munster, and Leinster away from home, and I've no doubt that under day they can beat anybody. I just worry about week to week not being able to pick up points during international periods because there's less clashes. Yeah, I think I'd love to see them be supported, particularly now because of how the Pro 14 has changed. Like, obviously they're in the European Cup this year, Champions Cup this year. So what funding they had historically was enough to do that, and so I can't criticize the IRFU for that, because they've actually achieved probably the maximum level that they could, and they're in at the top table. But I wonder, would it not have been smarter to actually give them a little bit more this year, given that the contest they're in is going to be more difficult? That's all.
Can I just ask you on that, Birch? You wrote about that in the Sindo, and I thought it was a really good piece. Like, how much are you talking about, and what way would that affect what Andy Friend is doing?
Well, so they've been cut 10% like all the other provinces have, right? So I would have said, if they had not cut them 10%, so whatever that was, whether if they're playing I don't know what their playing budget is, $5.5 million. If they were given that, if they were left with that 500,000, just take that. If they were left with 500,000, I felt that would give them a better crack at actually being able to stabilise this year. So look at this year; they got to play in the European Champions Cup, right? That's going to be incredibly tough, right? And then obviously they got to try and qualify again in a competition which, in theory, and we all hope, will be more competitive with a structure that is going to be harder to. It's not a straight top 8 anymore. So it's for me. I would have loved just 10%, or like obviously more than that if you could. But to say, look at Connacht, you're building a new stadium. That'll be ready in circa 3 years, right? We want to have 4 Irish provinces in the Champions Cup every year. That's what we're about. We want to have 4 teams at the top table, and we don't care whether South Africans come in or how it runs. We're good enough to be better than the Welsh and Scots and South Africans outside of those 4 automatic qualification spots. But we're going to back you on that. And obviously, when you get your new stadium there, you have to basically eat what you kill in terms of your own ability to drive revenue and to create more revenue to build your budget. So we're not promising you this forever. It's effectively an agreement over a 3 or 5 year period where you say, look, we've worked out that over the last 15, 20 years that we've given Munster, Ulster, and Leinster 5-6 million more. And we're going to back you for 3 years. We back Andy Friend. We believe in him, his ability. We back Willie Moran, his ability to run a good ship financially. And because of your success on the pitch in terms of, also Andy Friend is bringing through young Irish coaches like Mossy Lawler and Colin Tucker, which is credit to him. Their academy, Mark Sexton's gone down there. Eric Elwood's involved, etc., etc., etc. Nigel Carolan and Jimmy Duffy came through that pathway. So it's not just from a player point of view; it's from a coaching point of view as well that they're doing good work and they're prudent. Like, they don't spend money badly, which you can't say about the other provinces. So I would have just liked to see. And again, it's not a freebie. It's basically giving them more support and they commit to certain outcomes. But I just think with a new stadium, and if they're in the Challenge Cup year on year, that's going to affect their ability to be profitable or to wipe their face or to have the same deficits as everyone else long term. And it'll mean that we have 3 strong provinces and 1 a little bit weaker.
Do you share Birch's concerns about Connacht in the short term, Murray, based on what you saw in Cardiff?
Yeah, I do. I had a little bit of worry coming into the game, to be honest. Even running through, we did a series of pieces about like depth charts for each province, and you kind of study the squad and where they're strong, where they're not. And there were a few bits of lack of depth where you just what Birch said, a couple of injuries. And that's been the team really over the last few years. They always seem to have an injury crisis and then they're just scrambling, and they always do well to kind of survive it, but it really is difficult to do that season on season. And yeah, that was my concern. Then watching the game, I just felt they were just a little bit underpowered maybe, and Cardiff always had that extra gear. I do agree they looked really sharp, but I think Connacht gave them opportunities to look sharp. They didn't get a control on the game. They didn't physically get dominant really in any aspect of it, and I would have a concern around that area. Like the Bulls coming on to tomorrow on Friday, that'll be a really interesting test, and maybe they'll bounce back and absolutely hammer the Bulls physically. I mean, we saw they could do it last season. That Racing match stands out, but it's very hard to do that on a weekly basis when your squad is a little bit depleted or you don't have that depth and the ability to maybe make rotation changes and bring fresh bodies in there that are also big and powerful. So yeah, I do have a slight concern over them. Our season preview, we mentioned how that competitive nature of the new format is going to be potentially positive in ensuring that all the way through the season they have that real focus, but it makes it even harder for them to qualify into Europe as well. So yeah, I just hope that they don't fall away from where they've been. It's kind of been a case almost of standing still in the last couple of years. And Andy Friend mentioned before the season about encapsulating some of the identity of 2016 and winning the title. It would almost be an even bigger shock if they were able to do that this season. But you would hope that with their own kind of identity around playing, the speed and the adaptability that we mentioned, that they'll be able to pick up some of those big wins and probably just be a bit more consistent with their performances, as that's been the big issue. But slight concerns. It's very early days, obviously, and we really welcome to see them bounce back against the Bulls.
Yeah, it is incredibly early. Connacht against the Bulls on Friday night. What did you make of the Bulls, Birch, and the South African injection, generally speaking?
I'm very disappointed with them, to be honest. Considering that they've played a full Curry Cup campaign, both Leinster and Munster had a very short pre-season in terms of games, and they both blew them away, to be honest. I mean, I know the Sharks got an intercept and a late try, but they had. Sorry, look at the Sharks first. The Sharks had loads of possession, but really weren't stretching Munster in any meaningful way. And then the Bulls, the Josh van der Fleer try after 6 minutes. I mean, how narrow they were in defence, how poor their scramble was, like very, very, very poor. I mean, if Zebra or the Kings did that, we'd be just saying, oh, look, they're just here to make up the numbers. And I definitely think it's a huge game for them. I mean, they go to Connacht, the Bulls go to Connacht on Friday night. They've been hammered by Treviso. They've been well beaten by Leinster, and to go. I know Treviso was last season, but it's back to back in this competition as such. To go to Connacht and not get a win would be a big blow to them. And the Bulls have enough quality, I think, to be better than they were on Saturday. So, look, I do think they'll all get better, but they certainly didn't cover themselves in glory, either of them, on Saturday evening against Munster and Leinster.
They seem to be almost in awe of Leinster, not only on the pitch, and maybe not even on the pitch in fairness, but just in terms of some of the comments that came out of the Bulls afterwards, Murray, like waxing lyrical about Leinster's entire setup. It seemed a bit curious for an organisation of their own size to be so reverential towards another, almost like, oh, we've so much to learn from these guys. And in reality, it seems as though they do, but that kind of caught me by surprise. I would have had them as sort of like being the same, maybe not size, but having the same stature in the game, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. That's a Jake White masterclass, isn't it? He's setting the expectations low. He's saying he's already gone to the budget stuff. He's talking about French clubs' budgets, actually, I think this week, just to remind people that he's working with meager resources there. I look at their squad and I think they should be much better than they were. And they definitely didn't have any sense of imposing themselves at all, which really surprised me. There were no aggressive tackles. There was no real dust-ups even. Their maul got bullied by Leinster. Their line-out defence, the Leinster line defence was really excellent, and they dominated them in all aspects. On the flip side of it, I do think Leinster were really, really impressive. First game of the season, I thought they didn't show any signs of rust or not having had an extensive pre-season schedule. They were impressive against Harlequins as well, as Stuart Lancaster pointed out this week in the first half in particular, in their one pre-season game. And they've started really sharply. I think even the ideas around their attack were fresh. Players look excited to be on the pitch and enacting some of those ideas they've been working on. Physically, they looked fit and sharp, the likes of Johnny Sexton rolling back the ears a little bit. So they're in a really positive place, and they look refreshed and renewed a little bit. I know they've been consistently successful, but they haven't won the Champions Cup since 2018, and that's going to be a massive one for them this season. Obviously, taking nothing for granted in the URC, hopefully those South African sides will get more competitive. And we saw, I think, promising-ish signs from Edinburgh in their performance. Even Glasgow away to Ulster showed a bit as well. Hopefully they can be more competitive, but for Leinster, it is being judged on that European Cup. So I think they'll be renewed and refreshed. Andrew Porter over to Loosehead is obviously a fascinating one, the most interesting selection of them all. And that just points to where they maybe came up short in those big European games against Sarries and La Rochelle. They kind of pinpointed the tight five power, and now they're going to have a front row with Porter, Kelleher, Furlong starting, Cian Healy, Alala Toa, and Dan Sheehan, who's a really explosive athlete potentially coming off the bench. That's very exciting for them. So yeah, Bulls disappointed me definitely, but I thought Leinster were impressive to start the season that way.
What stood out to you? Who stood out to you, Birch, from Leinster's performance?
Look, I think Sexton, to be honest, Sexton over 2 games, Quins and Bulls. It's just ridiculous how fresh and energized he is, and how influential he is. It's just the small things he does that puts other people into space, and unless you rewatch it back the second time, you just think it's just a catch pass. But his timing, his ability to, as I said, fix defenders is is phenomenal. His range of kicking game. So yeah, he's the old veteran coming back looking sharp. And then I love Dan Sheehan. I think Dan Sheehan is going to be a brilliant player. That was a big game for him to get, starting in the first game of the season in the Viva. And he just looks like he's going. Him and Keller over the next 10 years, I think, are going to have ding dong battles. And they're both top. Well, Rowan Keller's proven to be, top end. Obviously went to South Africa with the Lions, but I think Sheehan is going to be a really interesting player to watch. And I know some of my friends in South Africa were texting me saying, "Who's this Dan Sheehan guy?" Which is interesting because it's hard to impress some of them, and they were blown away by him as well. So look, they were all looking great. Nick Van der Fleer was class, but just those two for me probably stood out.
New academy manager at Leinster as well, Bernard. In the past on this podcast, we've probably given out that there hasn't necessarily been a pathway, or at least not an abundance of them, for Irish coaches to progress their careers, and a lot of them hit ceilings. But in Simon Broughton, you've got a guy who actually has been there for a number of years at Leinster and worked his way up through the ranks. So what do you know about him? What can Leinster fans expect from him as their academy manager?
Yeah, I know him pretty well. He coached with me in Clontarf back in 2010. Backs coach by trade, came to Ireland to play. I think his first club was De La Salle. He was a good player. He was a very good player. Would have played AIL for De La Salle. Then became a coach. What I remember of him more than anything was his organisational skills. So he was a project manager on the Viva rebuild. So he was, I'm not sure whether he was an engineering side or the actual building side, but he's a project manager. So he very, very organised. And this job is less about coaching and it's more about managing. I think they've got 14 people reporting into you. And then obviously you have whatever players that are in the pathway from 18s up, probably 60, 70 players that they keep a close eye on. So it's very much, you're managing up in terms of managing the IRFU. You're an IRFU staff. So this is, so this is an IRFU appointment, but obviously your day job is looking after Leinster. So you're kind of split loyalties or split reports from that point of view. But yeah, he knows that he was actually the sub-academy manager. So he actually moved down to Donnybrook a couple of years ago, and effectively he managed that crop who were fighting to get the opportunity to go to the UCD, which is the main headquarters, and become senior academy players. So when you get senior academy, then you come under, Stuart's watch pretty much, and Leo, because you train with them, most days. But then the sub-academy guys do their own skill sessions down in Donnybrook, and they're in a rat race to try and get an academy contract. So Simon would have a very good appreciation of the challenges of both, and it's an in-house appointment, and he's a very hard worker, very meticulous, and I think he'll do a good job. I think he'll probably have a fair idea of what wasn't working well, particularly from that split facility, and it'll be interesting to see how he what changes he makes or what changes he's allowed to make by the IRFU.
Both of you guys were down at Thomond Park on Saturday, noticeably without me. I'm not going to lie, it hurt.
Sorry, guys.
But we will move on.
COVID restrictions.
If Leinster were, if Leinster were really impressive in their victory, which they were, Munster's performance was probably a little bit more curious, or it felt like people weren't necessarily overly impressed by it, even though it was ultimately a bit of a hammering. So, what did you actually make of it, Murray, upon reflection?
Yeah, it was a curate's egg, wasn't it? I thought the last try obviously was the moment of the weekend across the whole competition. Just a stunning score. And to see Snyman back offloading behind the back was wonderful. The handling skill under pressure, particularly Mike Haley's catch pass, was superb. And Goggin kind of nonchalantly rolling the ball in behind for Thomas Ahern to nearly steal it off Simon Zebo, and he probably should have just gone and taken it, I thought. But that was a stunning moment, and there was some other really high level aspects of their play. Craig Casey was the standout individual, really exciting performance, definitely stepping up and really kind of guiding this team now. And then you look at other bits where they had maul pressure for about 10 minutes at one stage in the first half, and they didn't hammer that home. There were a wide range of kind of missed opportunities to exploit space on the edge. We kind of flagged a few of them in our members newsletter this week. which they'll be disappointed with. They've created space on the edge, and it's something they're trying to develop in their game. And absolutely, it's a work in progress, and certainly still very early days in the season, and that kind of stuff will sharpen up. But that's been a theme, I think, in recent seasons with them. When they get to those crunch games, and you literally get one, maybe two opportunities on the edge, you've got to be ultra clinical, and they missed quite a few of them in this game, so they'll be frustrated with that aspect of it as well. But this was much more like, for me, a kind of first performance of the season. Lots there that was promising and really exciting, and even the age profile of the squad and guys like Casey and Coombs were really kind of starting to take over, as Peter Manny said after, is really positive. But loads there for them to just get a bit more polished and a bit more clinical with as well.
Yeah, it turned into a bit of a routine win, Birch. And as Murray says, there were glimpses that were exceptional. That last try moment of the weekend, possibly across the board in the URC. But I guess with Munster, whereas we've seen Leinster so often put together what you'd call a complete performance, in that nearly every aspect of their game is looking polished and they basically polish off the opposition, you're kind of waiting for Munster to produce one of those and then to actually produce them back to back, because that victory to me felt like a similar enough victory to what we would have seen plenty of times last season. You see, actually, they scored some unbelievable tries last season, but you wouldn't necessarily say they're the most expressive team in the world either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there did seem to be that intent to play more. I was critical at the time of them trying to play these little trick plays 5 yards out when it looked like they could just maul them over. But then driving home, I said, well, look, they practiced these all pre-season. They want to express themselves. They want to try and get away from that tight game. And also, even though they didn't work, I think it's going to put next week's opposition in two minds about, do they have to defend the blind side and the open side, and maybe it'll make it easier for them to score off them all. So I can understand that there was certainly an intent there. The only thing about Munster, I would say, is, and the Zebo's second try was unbelievable skills, and they are a skillful team as such, but they're one of the few pro rugby teams I know that don't have a full-time skills coach, which is just interesting in terms of how they set up. I know there's a guy from the one of the how would you say it, pathway coaches, I think, comes in and does little blocks, but it's interesting that you're trying to evolve your game, and yet there doesn't seem to be that focus on having that individual skills coach full time in the environment. But yeah, I could see that they wanted to play more, and it was good variety. And it'll just take a little while to settle. They overran some passes. Some of their passing on the edges wasn't good enough. But I think they do need to evolve and have a plan B, a plan C, which probably since Razzie came in, they have been pretty inflexible or pretty set in their ways about how they could play in opposition, and that's gotten to semi-finals. You would think, given probably the power deficit they're going to have against certain teams, they may need to have certainly a second way of playing. And I thought you could see that ambition to try and create that was certainly there. So yeah, work in progress for sure. Casey was class, and Zebo's going to score tries, and Coombs is going to score tries. So they've suddenly got two players with firepower, which can make the difference in big games. Snyman back as well is going to be like a new signing for them. So definitely positives.
On the coaching side of things then, Murray, I guess all the speculation at the moment is about contracts. Stephen Larkham came out during the week and said he would like to extend his stay. Van Gran, a little bit more mysterious. I mean, he doesn't tend to speak much anyway or actually omit much information. But what do you imagine is going to happen there across the board, really?
It sounds like the kind of wheels are in motion there with the entire coaching staff, and that those discussions have begun and are taking place, and that definitely, as Larkham indicated, there's an interest on their side in staying. If I'm being honest, kind of coming in towards this season, you think Van Gran's into last year of his contract, this might be the kind of natural conclusion of it anyway. But from Munster's point of view, a massive thing has been trying to get stability. It's a word they use a lot internally, because they haven't had that with their coaching staff. It's obviously been a really changeable element of the organization. And if you look at high performing organizations, often a lot of them do have a huge amount of stability kind of behind the scenes and in their coaching staff. and it can take time to build towards something. That's the question mark I think that supporters will have. Like I know for a fact a lot of them will have that, is this project going in the right direction, and are Munster actually making progress? The most recent evidence in a Pro 14 final, it was probably their most disappointing performance of all against Leinster. So there are those kind of question marks nagging away, but strategically and organizationally, it makes sense to kind of have that year on year development, even if it is incremental or tough for us to see at times on the outside. It sounds like Larkham has taken on a good bit more responsibility anyway around the game plan, and is, I suppose, de facto head coach with Johan as a director of rugby kind of role. Maybe there is space still, as Bernard mentioned, for a skills coach, because I know they were looking for one at one stage and spoke to a couple of people, but nothing ever happened there. And that would be a positive addition, I think, to the coaching staff. But it certainly sounds like things are moving in the direction of them at the moment staying. There's obviously been links with Larkham returning back to Australia, but maybe that little bit of media this week was just a nudge they needed to give him exactly that contract he wants.
What's your impression of it, Birch?
Yeah, I think I can see the value in stability for sure. I don't think there should be any real rush to tie them down yet. It's early days. It's September. I think the biggest black mark for me last year was not winning the Rainbow Cup when it was absolutely opened up for them to win silverware, and obviously that home defeat to Connacht, scuppered the chance of that. But yeah, I can see that there was value in having stability, but I think probably it'd be prudent to wait till November, December, really, to see how it's shaping up with the change that's happened with obviously Johan becoming more upstairs and Larkin being head coach, and how it evolves. I don't think there should be any mad rush to tie them all down yet.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Is there a bit of a push then on behalf of, say, Van Graan's agent, Larkham's agent? Like, how does that whole process work? Because I guess it's easy for Munster to say, let's see how we're getting on in the pool stages of Europe or whatever, and see how this goes until winter. But the lads are getting a bit edgy then as you're moving towards the new year, I'm guessing.
Yeah, obviously, as a coach, you want to know where you're going to be next year, the year after. So you'll be getting onto your agent saying, look, put a squeeze on. But having said that, it is quite early. I don't think other clubs, maybe bar going back to Australia, clubs in the Northern Hemisphere aren't going to be out there now chasing those coaches for a contract in June. They're going to want to see how their own coaches are going and how things develop. So, December, January is generally not considered too late to renegotiate and do a deal that's got 6 months left to run. That's how it works. If you're absolutely smashing it, yeah, maybe clubs a year out go to you and say, look at, we want to tie you down, or in the same manner, a clubs come and say, look, we're going to change coach, or coach is retiring in a year's time, or he's moving on. We want you to be part of it, and obviously you can run things, or you can oversee our recruitment, etc. While that time elapses. But yeah, I don't think they're not like it's not. Okay, they're very good coaches on paper, very impressive CVs, Larkham's and Roundtree's and Johans. But also, like, the trophy cabinet is pretty bare as well. And I think Munster need to, the first part of Munster getting better and winning trophies is actually demanding that actually happens regularly. So just happy being semi-finalists for me isn't where Munster should be. And I think it's important that they set their stall out. They have done in terms of bringing in Delande and Snyman. They did when they went and got Joey Carberry. It was clear that they wanted to change the dynamic or the pecking order. And I don't think, agents of coaches have often been told, look, we're not ready to make a decision yet. Particularly in the IRFU, when you're contracted through the IRFU, I mean, it's not just the CEO of Munster who has a say in this. It's also David Nucifora. And we know David Nucifora is a big fan of Johan van Graan. So maybe that's part of it. I think Johan is a very solid and a very good guy, very solid coach and a very good guy. So I'm not saying he has to go, but I just don't think they need to decide yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair enough. Never a dull moment with Munster. Not too many dull moments either in Ulster's victory over Glasgow Murray. was it 9 tries, I think, in the end. So based on what we were saying of Ulster in like our preview show, how did they get on relative to that, to your mind?
Yeah, it was a bit of everything in there. It was wild stuff, and it was quite Ulster, to be honest. At times they were in position to kind of drive it home and have a comfortable last 20 minutes, but it certainly wasn't the case. Glasgow were kind of pounding their try line right at the end, and they did show their resolve to hold on. As I mentioned earlier, I thought Glasgow showed signs of promise. Obviously, Nigel Carolan's the attack coach there, and would have enjoyed some of their stuff. They have some good young players. Rory Darge, the back row, was excellent, and Tuipulotu in the centre, a new signing, was really good. He's Scotland qualified. Excellent both sides of the ball. Ulster, yeah, they'll be frustrated that in what is a kind of team with them, they didn't make it a little bit more comfortable, having been in a good position. There was a lot of the kind of first day jitters there and hiccups around set piece and stuff, and timing being slightly off that they'll hope to iron out a bit. But again, loads of excitement there. Nathan Doak got 50 minutes after John Cooney's injury, which is a concern. Obviously, he's had that scan this week, and they'll hope for good news on that front. But without obviously, being blindingly good, Doak showed his promise and his ability to step up and have the head for that kind of occasion. And he's a really exciting talent with Allison kind of gifting him a bit of a try. He blocked down and offloaded to show his skill level as well. So yeah, loads of promising signs. Stuart McCluskey was excellent as always for them, and Mick Carney got off the bench, I thought. So yeah, there was bits and pieces there that were really pleasing for Ulster, but they've got to get better at that control of games, when they've got the momentum, shutting the game down, if that's the right thing to do, or vice versa, if they're trying to get back into it, having that ability to lift tempo as we know they can. So definitely a real first day performance from them.
Yeah, not too dissimilar to Munster's performance, I suppose, Birch. And Dan McFarlane will be happy enough with that, in the sense that you get the win, look good in spells, like vast spells, but then still have plenty to talk about on Monday, where you need to improve for the weekend afterwards.
Yeah, they were tested, and that's the thing that Leinster and Munster haven't been yet. So I think from 100% agree with you. Dan will be happy. They got the ideal result. They got a chance to have to fight for every inch, as Dan says, at the end to defend their line, but yet put together some really good rugby and some necessary fixes that exposed where they're at defensively, which is fine. I mean, Jared Payne's a very good defense coach, but at least they got tested, broken, and now there's an opportunity this week to fix that, and they should be a better team for it. And that's exactly what you want in this league. You want matches that you are testing, you're learning, and Ulster managed to win and learn, which is ideal.
Murray, what did you make of the opening weekend overall as a package of entertainment, a new look competition with this infusion of new South African franchises? I kind of got the impression from Twitter, which maybe isn't the best sounding board at times, but that there was a little bit of excitement about it, or there was, probably more enthusiasm about it than we've seen in, say, the opening round of Pro 14s and 12s past. Did you get that same impression? Were you happy enough with it?
Totally got the same impression, absolutely. And there's a nice run of 5 rounds of this to open it up, and interest levels are high. I'm certainly engaged with it, and yeah, I mean, the new additions weren't particularly strong at all. The Lions obviously had some exciting rugby on the Friday night against Zebra, against some really bad defence, but the other 3 teams certainly have improvements to make. I think there's little signs there. We know the Bulls are definitely better than that. The Sharks even, I'm not sure the scoreline was completely reflective of the gulf between them. They'll have learned a huge amount from it, and some pretty young players in their squad. And the Stormers Benetton match, I really enjoyed watching that, and it'll be fascinating to see how they go now against Munster, a kind of step up. And Benetton, we know, are a good solid team these days as well. So yeah, all in all, I have to say I really enjoyed it. I thought the quality was really good, really exciting rugby, and definitely a step in the right direction for me. So hopefully it can kind of grow and grow each weekend as we go.
What was the chatter like in coaching land, Birch? Was there a bit of a buzz, or a bit more of a buzz even than seasons past, or much of the same? Yeah,
no, I think people are excited. Look, the 4 new teams have the Leinster actually really, really rated the Bulls, and were very worried about the challenge that they presented, and that's a good thing. You want to basically come in on a Monday morning and have that little bit of an edge. Know you have to be on point, and I think that these teams will give us that for different reasons. The Lions maybe because of their stage of development, will be a little bit more kamikaze from an attacking point of view. But that presents a challenge. We believe the Bulls and the Sharks, when they get their front liners back, will have that real power game. And the Stormers, have a lot of young players. There's a bit of shit off the field there that they probably need to get sorted out before we see improved performances on the field. But definitely coaching land. Everyone's excited about the new laws and how they will affect things. And the pressure's on to get points. I mean, if Connacht were to lose Friday, having been the only Irish province, just not to refer back to them, but because they lost last weekend, to lose at home, suddenly you'd imagine the other three provinces will win. Suddenly, then in terms of that interprovincial pool, they're behind the eight ball a little bit. So you can't really just slowly, find your way in the season. You need to hit the ground running in this first block of 5. So I think that's a great way of getting fellas on the edge of their seats and having that those butterflies in their tummy.
The best thing of all, Gav, the fans are back. The fans are rugby. I had goosebumps just at the start in Thomond Park because it was just so wonderful to hear it again, to see people there enjoying themselves. Birch was inundated with selfie requests. It was a wonderful occasion. And the rugby is so much better when there's people roaring and chanting and booing and screaming for Simon Zebo literally relentlessly in Thomond Park. So that was the best part of all, really.
Yeah. Screaming for Zebo, screaming for Birch. A wonderful day, a wonderful occasion for all involved.
Be worried them, yeah. It's about me anyway. I can see the traction in Zeebs.
Boys, I'll let you go. Thanks a million as always. Thank you, Birch.
Yeah, just actually my week continues in good. I'm actually going to watch the Sharks train now. They're training down in St. Michael's, so
nice.
Go and get a close up of them and see what they're at. Yeah.
You're living the dream, Birch. You are living the dream.
It's going to stop tomorrow.
Where can we see you over the weekend, Birch, actually on TV?
I'm on Connacht against I'm on Connacht Bulls Friday night for Premier and Dragons Leinster from Newport Sunday for Premier.
Super. What about yourself, Murray?
I'm back in Thomond Park, so can't wait for it. Yeah, it's going to be a cracker.
Taking up residency in Thomond. Love it. You'll be back as well with Owen Toolan on Monday for the 42 members. It's members.the42.ie if you want to get Rugby Weekly Extra with the two lads, an uber analytical podcast looking back on the weekend's action. And we'll be back then again in this regular slot next Thursday. So until either Monday or Thursday, mind yourselves, enjoy all of the rugby over the weekend and take it easy.